Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in system-centered technologies. Today's discussion will be part 12 of an ongoing series talking about application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today, focus specifically on the integration between Config Manager and App-V, the ability to deploy virtualized applications through Config Manager. We'll do that. Today's session will be an overview discussion to introduce the topic and show how Config Manager and App-V can work together. Okay. Kind of to set the stage for that, we're going to talk about also App-V by itself, just standalone App-V, what it is, what the benefits of it are, what an infrastructure might look like if standalone App-V were deployed. Then we'll spend time talking about App-V and Config Manager, the benefits there, and there are a lot. The infrastructure, if you plug in App-V alongside Config Manager, and then we'll spend the bulk of our time walking through a demo that I have in the lab. Let me say from the outset, this is not intended to be an exhaustive discussion of App-V. This is, as the name implies, this is an overview session just to show you what it looks like for App-V and Config Manager to integrate. All right, and the benefits accordingly. So, and there are significant benefits from App-V. We'll talk about a couple of them here in a minute. There's also significant benefits of integrating App-V and Config Manager over and above what standalone App-V will give you, and we'll talk about those. A couple, just to kind of get you thinking. If you have Config Manager in the environment and you want to use App-V, it just makes a whole lot of sense to leverage that existing infrastructure to deliver the virtualized applications. Config Manager does it very, very well without the expense of adding additional infrastructure and potentially a team for a separate infrastructure, whatever. So we'll talk about that again in a minute. Avoids duplication of effort, right? Config Manager is all about deploying software to the environment. In Config Manager 2012, it's a very elegant approach with the application model we've been talking about up until now. Right, being able to deploy the application and then have the flexibility of deciding how that deployment takes place, whether it's a physical installation, a virtual installation, whatever. Again, we'll talk about that more in a minute and see in the demo. And then if we unify Config Manager and App-V, we have options, right, that we might not have in Config Manager if we do this thing standalone. So we'll get to that in a minute. All right. So, as we get started, what really is App-V? Probably heard about what App-V is, probably know what it is, but in case this is the first time you're hearing about it or approaching the topic, App-V is, at its core, virtualized software delivery. So, in the world we live in, we're all about virtualizing everything, right? So, systems, certainly software, and there are advantages to doing that. So, virtualizing your software deployment gives some pretty compelling benefits. One of them is the ability to deploy the software and do so in a non-invasive way. Non-invasive is my term. The way it looks, the reason it's non-invasive is because the software, pick your favorite software, Office, Adobe, whatever. Virtualized, you can install it, if you will, on the system, but when you look at the system, you see no evidence that it's there. Right, so if you run the MSI on a system, then you can go to the registry generally and see indications that the software is there. You can go to the file system, see indications that the software is there. Go to add or remove programs, see indications that the software is there. Not with App-V, right? Because it is in its own bubble, if you will, that is separate and apart from the system, which that alone gives some pretty compelling benefits, as we'll talk about in a minute. So it really is taking a generic PC, deploying software to it in a way that the PC is unaffected, right? It doesn't know that the software is there. It is there running through the virtual engine known as App-V, but without the impact to actually having to physically install it there. And the other cool thing is virtualized software, user doesn't know any difference. Full access to the PC. Full access, fully accessible and usable by the user. So there are a couple of places where there are limitations and challenges and such, but We'll talk about how App-V can even help you get around those here in just a minute. And App-V gives IT greater choice and efficiency. So once we understand App-V, now we have options. Once we introduce App-V into the environment, now we have options. Maybe not every software deployment is suitable for a physical installation scenario. Maybe it makes a lot of sense, and it does, to deploy applications virtualized in some scenarios. So without App-V, don't have that choice. With App-V, particularly integrated with ConfigMgr, now we have a lot of options in how we deliver our software to the environment. So this will come clear. Again, if this is new to you, you'll see it in action here once we get into the lab. So what are some of the benefits of App-V? So this is just talking about standalone App-V. App-V is App-V, right? There are benefits of using App-V at its core. Then there are more benefits of integrating it with ConfigMgr. So we'll break those two apart. First, centralized management. So App-V, like ConfigMgr, does offer the ability, or standalone App-V, like ConfigMgr, does offer the ability to centrally manage your experience, right? Standalone App-V offers some pretty compelling abilities to target users in a very good way. So ConfigMgr can target users for sure with deployments, but one of the requirements when targeting users with software in ConfigMgr, typical traditional deployments, right? If you target a user specifically, then if you target a user group, so you can target users and user groups. If you target a group of users and the user that you want to receive the software is not currently in that group, then you can target the group all day, but until the user logs off and logs back on, they're never going to know about that deployment. That is a Windows security requirement. It's not a ConfigMgr thing. Well, App-V actually works around that by using some database magic and different things that are in there. So if you have that same user group targeting scenario, the user doesn't ever have to log off and log back on to learn they have a new deployment, right? Which is a pretty good advantage. You can do the same with ConfigMgr, setting up collections and different things, but certainly enabled by App-V using the database that they provide and so forth. Okay. The App-V infrastructure will support both remote and local streaming. So what is streaming? So we talk about virtualized apps, right, being in this bubble. So we still have to deliver the content from somewhere. So whether you're running Adobe or Office from a physical installation on your hard drive or through this virtualized experience, at some point we have to locate and run this content from somewhere, right? Well, there's two options in the App-V world. You can choose a server to be what's called a streaming server, and much like a distribution point, stream it across your network to your system, which works great in some scenarios. Or you can locally load the data onto the system, very much like loading it into the client cache on ConfigMgr, and run it locally so that you don't have to hit the network and stream that data across. Either way is fine. Certainly scenarios for each one, and App-V offers that. Flexible administration. So with App-V, the concept, this software being in a separate bubble, so to speak, really enables easier application upgrade and management, right? So now, think about physical installations. If you have a physically installed piece of software on a system and you want to upgrade that, you're going to have to interact with that system to just push new software onto it and upgrade the software that's already there, which comes with its own challenges in some scenarios, or you're going to have to uninstall the software that's there and reinstall the new software that's there. Again, has some potential challenges along the way there. Very doable, as we've seen in ConfigMgr 2012 with the application model especially, but it is just a little bit of work that you have to do. With App-V, certainly you're going to need to update the version if you're going to do an upgrade scenario or management type scenario. But the cool thing is it's done on the back end. The administrators do it, and then the bubble just gets updated, if you will. So one version is taken away, the other version is replaced. It's all running in the bubble. You don't have any impact to other software that's there, which is the next another point here under the flexible administration, you don't have to test as much. So with physical software, there are potentials to negatively impact other software that's installed on the system, right? So whenever you do an upgrade, you're going to have to worry about regression testing in your environment. You're going to have to worry about maybe custom software on a system doesn't play well with the new software that's being deployed. So you have to figure out workarounds and that kind of thing. With App-V, it's all running in an isolated bubble. So you don't need to worry so much. It's prudent for sure to do testing, but the amount of testing that you need is not as significant, right? To do this, because the apps don't really know about each other. They don't really they're not really installed on the system, so to speak, right? So what do I mean by not really installed on the system? Well, so a virtualized app. So when you install a physical app, you're going to run it out there, and typically, if you look in the registry or look in the file system or look in programs and features or whatever, you're going to see indications that software was installed, that it is there. If you install software, if you make software available through App-V, you can go to the Start menu and see links to that software or shortcuts on the desktop, however you do it. But if you look on the file system or the registry or programs and features, there's nothing there to tell you that the software ever has been installed, because it hasn't been, right? It's just running through the App-V client in its own bubble. All right. The another thing about this. So one of the scenarios that App-V helps enable is the ability to load side-by-side software that otherwise could not coexist. So think about Office, right? So trying to load Office 2010 on the same system as Office 2013, not workable, because they share registry keys, expect to have a clean environment without other versions of Office, etc. With App-V, it's absolutely possible. So think about the transition from the typical or traditional interface that we had in Office up until, I think, Office 2007 to the ribbon in 2010. That might take a little bit for users to become accustomed to. If you just push them to the Office 2010 version, it might cause some loss of productivity, some frustration as people have to learn the new system, upgrade, whatever. So here with App-V, you can enable choice. The user can have both Office 2007 and Office 2010 running together on the box, both virtualized, one physical, whatever you want, and have that time to transition over to the new version, begin getting comfortable with the new version, but have the previous version to fall back on in case they need it. Right? So that kind of scenario is enabled here as well. That kind of goes to the user experience, but it came to mind, so I went ahead and threw that out there. So what else? On the administration side, definitely App-V facilitates PC replacement repair type scenarios. So if your applications are being delivered through the App-V engine and they're not physically required to be installed in the box, then a user can literally use any PC that's App-V enabled. When they log in, their applications are going to be available to them. And the beautiful thing about App-V is let me contrast. So when you install physical software in a box, you're going to have to wait for that MSI to complete running before that software can be launched, can be used, whatever. App-V doesn't require that. Certainly you're going to need all of the components available on the bottom of the box to be able to run it effectively and have all the pieces that you want and so on. But whenever a user first logs onto a box, maybe that doesn't have their application, that application becomes available to them through App-V and can be launched within seconds of the user logging on, even though it's physically not there yet, right? And it's never going to physically be there, even though it's not been fully transferred, fully available yet. It might be some components need to continue to launch in even after the user starts the application, whatever, right? So essentially, you could open up Word pretty much right away, even though it might be coming from a streaming server, or you need to get the content locally, or whatever, right? App-V enables that. All right, and then reduced help desk calls as a result. If you're using a virtualized app, then will all help desk calls go away? No, but certainly you would expect a lot of compatibility issues to be decreased. The ability for users to use multiple PCs will enable them, if there's something wrong with theirs, to move to a loaner system for a period of time, whatever, right? Okay, so flexible user experience. So again, user not required to use a specific PC. If you're in a cube type scenario with just a whole bunch of workspaces, then a user can pick any system they want to. Users can huddle together with maybe a cluster of PCs somewhere that makes sense and use them and have their same experience that they need available to do their job. So it helps them have or helps them by not having reduced downtime, allowing them to be efficient, etc. Right? Okay. App-V does fully support a VDI environment, and then there are enhancements to App-V 5.0. As of this recording, has not been released yet. It's in beta, but definitely some enhancements that are on the way with App-V 5.0 that will make this even more compelling. So let me spend just a couple of minutes there, and then we'll move on. So again, currently in beta, two key things about App-V 5.0 that are really interesting. So I've mentioned that applications in the App-V experience run in their own bubble. Right? They're isolated, but still can fully access the resources of the PC. Well, sometimes having those applications isolated isn't really what you want. There can be some challenges with that. So, for example, if you have Outlook, right, then you can virtualize Outlook, no problem. But then there might be some plugins that go alongside Outlook, and you want those plugins to be able to interact with Outlook. But they have challenges doing that because they're in their own virtual bubbles. They don't see each other, right? Well, there's two ways to handle that. The first way is to build the virtual package for the apps in a unified way. So basically build one big package that contains both Outlook and all the plugins. Okay, well, that has its own challenges. And building the package, by the way, is called sequencing. I'll show you the sequencer briefly in just a minute. That has its own challenges. So one of the things that we enable in App-V 5.0 is the ability to continue to build these isolated pieces, or build the Outlook in its own App-V package, build the plugins in its own App-V package, and then create a link between them so that those apps then are able to see one another. It's called virtual application connections. Right? You can decide which bubbles are able to communicate and see one another. So where those applications exist in their own bubble, they don't need any other pieces to other apps on the system that are virtualized to be able to interact. Cool, you don't need to worry about it, right? But in those cases where the apps are in a bubble, they need to be able to see all the other apps, and in this case, Outlook needs to be able to, or the plugins need to be able to find Outlook or whatever. You can enable that very easily. It's just a web console. You quickly associate the applications in what are called, again, a virtual application connection group, and you're done, right? And those applications work. So that's some pretty cool stuff with App-V 5.0. Another thing that App-V 5.0 enables is shared cache storage. So in the past, applications, if they're going to run, would need their own location to run from, right? Well, now applications can share a cache on the server side. Now that does imply streaming across the network, but if you're in a data center connected environment, no big deal. Again, it enables more choice for you. Again, I won't spend any more time on those. They're coming in App-V 5.0, which is just in beta as the time of this recording. So to go further in depth on them really probably wouldn't be warranted at this stage. But they are cool and they're coming. That said, let's take a look again at the standalone App-V infrastructure. These are just the pieces that you can use. A standalone App-V infrastructure doesn't need every single piece. Depending on your scenario, it could be designed a few different ways. But in most environments where you want to do the full App-V experience, you will have at least one of each of these components. So the first thing, upper left corner, we start with is the App-V sequencer. I mentioned that just a second ago. The App-V sequencer is the piece that's responsible for transforming, if you will, the physical installation package into a form that can be run through the virtual experience. Okay? It's interesting the way it does it. I'll go ahead and say this. I'll probably say it again here in just a minute when you see the sequencer. But the way it does it is basically the app-V sequencer runs on a plain vanilla reference machine, something that you would expect to have in your environment. No large amount of software. Very much a baseline image system. And then you would start the sequencer. You would install the physical software on the box, and the sequencer will just sit there and watch that installation, gather data about files and registry settings, where they go, all those different things. And then at the end of the installation, package those all up together, create the needed registry key structure and physical file structure and all of that inside the virtual bubble. So we have access to all of those things that we need. It's just they're not going to be on the physical system when we're done, right? But we need to watch them. We need to see what is created and how it's done to be able to know what we need to put inside our virtualized app. Now, if that sounds similar to another piece of another utility called SMS Installer back from the SMS 2.0 days, it is. It is a similar experience. It's different, right? But it is a similar experience in that during the installation, we watch the changes on the system and then package up a result at the end, and so on. SMS Installer was all about physically delivering the software after watching it happen on a reference machine. App-V is about delivering a virtualized version of that, but again, kind of the same approach. So anyway, another component is the streaming server, right? So the streaming server is the location that will stream the virtualized app once it's created to the clients or to the app-V clients. So these are systems that have the app-V client installed. In order for a system to participate in running virtualized apps, it needs to have the app-V client installed. Okay. Then we have the app-V management server and the database. So the app-V management server provides overall management. This is what enables you to push out maybe the app-V icon to the desktop of different systems so that users know, oh, there's a new app I can run. They can click on it, goes and gets the app from the streaming server, and so on, right? So, and then the database just enables reporting, enables the management, enables the user group to app mappings and different things. So these are the components of the app-V standalone infrastructure. You might have multiple app-V streaming servers. Okay? You're going to only generally have one app-V sequencer, one app-V database, and one app-V management server. You can have multiple app-V streaming servers. That's standalone. Okay? We'll see how it changes and how some of these components are not needed in the ConfigMgr 2012 version of the infrastructure here in just a minute. So before we get to that, so we've talked about app-V. We've talked about the benefits of app-V. Well, so what are the benefits of standalone app-V? So what are the benefits of integrating app-V with ConfigMgr? Okay. Well, there's several. First, we've mentioned a couple of them, right? With a unified app-V ConfigMgr infrastructure, you reduce the need to have duplicate infrastructure. ConfigMgr is already deployed in the environment. ConfigMgr is already in place to facilitate software deployment and other things, right? So plugging in app-V is really easy. All you really need is the client, the app-V client on the box, and you're home free to be able to run these virtualized apps. Okay, so we'll see that in just a minute. The other thing, no duplicative effort. So if you have your ConfigMgr infrastructure stood up and you have the team already managing that, they know how to deploy software. That's one of the major things they do: software updates, even OS images, other types of management through ConfigMgr. So adding on the virtualized app delivery is just second nature, and it makes a whole lot of sense. With the new application model in ConfigMgr 2012, it's really cool. So that's next, application deployment, right? We know how to deploy the app. And we've already talked about in this series the benefits, the tweaks of the new application model to be able to decide how a given application's installed, dependencies that need to be in place, supersedence related, all of that stuff, right, plays in to physical applications. Well, it plays in to virtual apps the same way, right? In fact, you'll see in just a minute in the lab when I get to this, deciding to deploy a virtual app, really all it is an additional deployment type for the existing app. So we define the app once, And then we have additional deployment types that will give us the flexibility of, in some scenarios, deploying it in a physical install. In other scenarios, it might be an App-V. In other scenarios, it might be, different things. So App-V is just one type that can easily plug into the existing deployment of the application in ConfigMgr. Whereas if you don't use ConfigMgr for that, you're going to have two infrastructures where you have to define that application and the experience for deploying it. Right? And then even beyond application deployment, in ConfigMgr, we know about App-V, our client. We know how to work with our client and leverage additional functions of ConfigMgr. So asset intelligence, we understand the App-V world. Software metering, inventory, right? We can work with the App-V environment because we understand our client. It's kind of in summary, if you use ConfigMgr and to manage both physical and virtual apps, then you do that in the same place. You're not using separate disconnected systems for managing your virtual assets versus your physical assets. You do it in one place, so you get unified reporting. It's very easy, and it's all there. So the reporting engine in ConfigMgr 2012 is incredibly robust, and by having App-V included in the mix, you can leverage that reporting engine to pull together whatever stats you might need. All right. So that said, what about the ConfigMgr and App-V infrastructure? Well, here's how it changes. Essentially, it's the same little diagram, just relabeled, right? So if you have ConfigMgr and you want to integrate App-V, you're definitely going to still need the sequencer, right? Because the sequencer is what takes the app and converts it to the virtualized version. In fact, before I forget to mention this little side note, so Office is, so what you're going to start to see applications delivered in virtualized format just straight out the door. So Office, as an example, you will see as one of the first products that's delivered natively in an App-V sequenced option, pre-sequenced for you. There are tools out there to make sequencing easier. So some of the partner tools that are available, you can basically point at a physical MSI and convert it over to a sequenced app. Yeah, you can have challenges along the way. You can have challenges in some scenarios with sequencing anything, but by and large, it's majority of things would work fairly easily. It might be 10% of your apps you'd have challenges with or whatever. Regardless, App-V sequencing pretty by itself, even without some of these extra tools, is pretty straightforward. Yeah, there can be those oddball apps, right, that need a little bit more attention, but generally it's a pretty interesting experience, pretty good experience. So we'll see the sequencer in just a minute. So you notice, as far as other server components, there are no other server components from App-V. There is no streaming server. There is no management server, right? There is no database server, because all of those pieces already exist in the ConfigMgr infrastructure. Once you sequence the app, all you have to do is plug it into the existing ConfigMgr infrastructure, into an existing application deployment, and it just works, right? So in this example, I have my CAS, right? I can consume the sequenced app at my CAS. I can do it at the primary too, but I can build my app at the CAS. It replicates down to the primary. The primary is a DP by itself, so it can immediately be used to send content down to your App-V client. We can stream to the App-V client from our DP. We can download to the App-V client and enable that as well. Okay, here I have a standalone DP, so it can also stream down to our clients, and so on. So very easy integration with ConfigMgr. Again, that infrastructure is already in place, so no need to duplicate it. All right. So enough in the PowerPoint. Let's get over to a demo and kind of really see how all this works. So let me pull my lab into the screen and we'll take a look. So well, first of all, before I get into the application, let me show you the sequencer. So I have a separate sequencer here. And I'm not going to sequence anything. I'll just kind of show you a pre-sequenced app that I have. So when I launch the sequencer, I have a couple of choices. First, I can create a new virtual application, or I can modify an existing one. So if I want to create a new one, I have a couple of choices here. Create a new package, and the way I do that is by launching this, essentially clicking Start and then going ahead to proceed with the physical installation of the software by running the MSI or whatever. Right? And again, we're watching, we're capturing as that goes along, and recording that, and at the end we'll encapsulate that in a virtualized app package and have that for delivery out to systems. Or I can use a package accelerator. So a package accelerator basically enables more streamlined generation of virtualized apps. So if you have a package accelerator available that might have some pre-configured settings for the app, it just streamlines that approach for creating the app. So again, I'm not going to go through the process of doing this here, but this is an option. So we have another option here. Yes, I want to get rid of it, which is to modify an existing package. So if I have a package that I've created for App-V, then I can certainly update that package, I can edit that package, or I can add a new application to the package. So let's talk about these. So update an application in the existing package. If you have software update that needs to go onto that, then you can certainly facilitate that with this wizard. If you just want to change a setting in the package, you can do that here by editing the package contents. We'll do this in a sec. If you have a second or third application you want to add to this existing package, then you can use this option to do that. So that was what I was talking about a minute ago, where if you have this Outlook scenario and you have the Outlook plugins, that's just one example, then you could package those together, right? And that way, being in the same package, they can interact and see each other. Works, but it has potentially some challenges here and there as you add more applications to the mix. There's more potential issues that could come up in the sequencing process. Whatever, it also creates really large packages that you might not need to have that large in every case, right? So, but that's what you do here. And at v 5.0, just as a reminder, you don't have to do that. You can just have individual packages, bubbles, if you will, that can communicate back and forth. Or you can, just edit your package, like I said, to change some settings. So let me just do that. I have Word viewer over here that I've got created already as a virtualized app. So I'll just open that up and click Edit, and we'll open up the package. And pretty simple. Word viewer is pretty simple, but you'll be able to see all the different components of Word viewer that have been picked up and part of the app. So different package version, data, package GUIDs, directories, different places, and so on, launch size, total package size, whatever. So the deployment, you can see details about where this can be deployed, what platforms are selected, what enforcement options for the package, and so forth. Any history of change for the application, the files that are part of the application. Okay, so you can just expand those out. All right, and then the virtual registry. So these are the registry settings that will be in place for the application. So different pieces that we picked up while the application was installing, they're captured here, and we can sort on through them. And this is what we detected changed when the application was installed. So we're going to make this available in our virtual bubble, so the application has what it needs. Virtual file system. Okay. And then the services, the virtual services that were there, and different states and so on. So this is the description. This is all scraped from the installation of Word Viewer, in this case 2003, physically on the box while the sequencer was running. Now we have it converted into a virtualized app that can be deployed. Okay, so that's the sequencer. Enough about that for now. Certainly, we could spend a lot of time just talking about the sequencer on its own. That's more of an App-V specific topic, so don't know if we'll do that in a future session yet or not, but that's it. Now, so for the demo here, I've actually used a different package, a different virtual package that I have. I actually have a package to deliver Mozilla Firefox, which, of course, no one's really going to deploy in an enterprise environment. Everyone's going to use IE, but I have this package, so I figured I'd go ahead and use it for a demo. So let's discuss how this is constructed. So I've got the applications. So using the ConfigMgr 2012 approach, I want to deploy the application itself. Well, there could be various forms that I want to deploy this application in. So while I'm deploying the application, I might want to have a physical installation in some cases here versus a virtual installation in others. So the scenario that I've kind of painted here, just for discussion purposes, illustrate this. So say that on all of my new Windows 7 systems, I want to deploy a later build of Firefox, right? One that I've tested for Windows 7. But on my Windows XP systems, I want to deploy a previous version of Firefox, one that will enable them to use Firefox for whatever purpose I've got in mind. But maybe it's not the latest and greatest build, and I don't want to put it on there in a physical way because I am actively migrating from XP to Windows 7. So instead of spending the time to physically install it there, I want to make it available where it's needed on those XP systems, but eventually know they're going to move to Windows 7 anyway. So that virtual app, at some point won't be necessary anymore for those scenarios. But I want to enable it both right now. So I've got the physical installation right here, and let's look at the details of my deployment type and look at it. So the key thing is this requirements tab. I have set a requirement that this only runs on Windows 7 systems. So the XP systems should not ever be able to get this, right? Well, conversely, I have my virtual version here, App-V version. You'll see fewer options here on the tabs, but the requirements rules are still here, and according to the requirements rules, this can only run on Windows XP systems. So I should never on XP systems get a physical installation of this software, just a virtual version. And this kind of illustrates a point that I talked about earlier about deploying applications in ConfigMgr 2012. If you look at a deployment, you'll notice that there's one deployment, one application, two deployment types. There's nowhere in this deployment that I ever specify which deployment type to actually run. The mechanism that tells me which deployment type to run is the requirements rules. On the client system, on the ConfigMgr client system, whenever we get this application, we're going to run through the various requirement rules that exist on the deployment types in that application. We'll do them in priority order. Again, we talked about this before, right? So we'll start with this one, and if we don't pass the requirement rules here, we'll move to this one. So on the Windows 7 system, we would have to process this one first, realize that it doesn't apply to us, and then we'll come down to this, and we'll meet that requirement rule, so we'll present that one, have it available. Whereas on the XP system, we'll never process this one because we passed the requirement rule up here, right? Just a tangent to kind of re-illustrate that point. All right. So let's move to our client and see what that experience is like. Let's start with our Windows 7 client. So I will start up here. Here's a Windows 7 client. So I actually already have this installed, right? So if I look at Software Center, you'll see that I've got Firefox as an installed application. It's already there. Just to save some time, we've seen applications install ad nauseum already in previous sessions. So if I look on my Start menu, you will see that Firefox is definitely here. Okay. If I go to my Program Files folder, you will see that it's there. I think it's x86. I think there. Okay, Mozilla Firefox. So it's physically there. It's on the system. If I go into the registry, I would see it too, but in this case, I'll just skip over that and go to Control Panel and go to Programs and Features here. So you will see Firefox is available, so it's definitely physically installed. All right, so I can launch it. It'll work just fine. So there it is. It'll launch just like you would expect it to, and be available to the user, and so forth. So just give it a second to show up on the screen, and then we'll move over to our virtualized version. All right, so you see it coming up, and you can tell that it is what it is, right? So let's move over to our virtualized version. Get this out of the way. That will be the XP client. And in the same way, right, we can see Firefox. We see the shortcut on the desktop. It was put there in the deployment type. We can specify to put that on the desktop. I didn't show you that, but it was there. if I go in here, I will see it on the start menu, not in the same place. It's not here, but notice virtualized applications come on. If I scroll over, here's Firefox down here. But if I go into the file system, it's not going to be here. I'll just tell you that. And you can also predict that it's not going to be in add and remove programs. Oops, wrong disk. So there's no indications at this level that Firefox is installed at all, right? And then if I go to the registry, if I go to the control panel and look at add and remove programs right here, there's also no indication that Firefox is installed. We'll let that populate for just a second, and there it is. So no indication it's there because it's really not here. I mean, it's here, but it's not here, right? So let's go launch this thing, and we'll see a little bit of the different experience here. So notice I've launched it. Notice down here there should be a bar that shows up. This is indicating that it's launching through App-V. It's being streamed, in this case, from my distribution point. So it just takes a couple of seconds. This is a slower VM, so it takes a few seconds for this to launch. But in the production environment on a system, it wouldn't take any time at all, right? And also, notice that with my application that I configured in ConfigMgr, I am deploying different versions of Firefox, but it's the same application. It's a generic Firefox application, but in the physical installation, I'm deploying version 14, I believe it is, and on the virtual version, I'm deploying version 3. Very easy to do, very, very flexible model to be able to do what you want. And I could add other deployment types, I could have different logic, I could do whatever I needed from a business perspective, and it's here. So you notice that it is here. And let me show you the Firefox client, the App-V client interface. And you notice it's here as well. So it's on the start menu, right? It is available just like any other app, but it's just there virtually. So let me go to the App-V interface for a minute. So if I go to Program Files, App-V, then the executable for the interface is right here. That's where I'll launch it. Okay, so it'll take it a second to come up. There it is. And so here I can see about my virtual environment. So I just have one virtual app in place right now. Question I've heard come up from time to time is there a limit on the number of virtual apps that you can have running at a given time? And there is, certainly, but it's not a hard limit from App-V. It is a limit only in as much as your system resources can handle. Typically, RAM is going to be exhausted first. But you can have certainly multiple App-V-based applications running, no problem. So here you see, here's Firefox. It is in use. If I look at the definition of this package, I can see that my shortcut, local OSD file shortcut, whatever, is available on my desktop. Or in my user profile, in my OSD cache folder, and so on, right? But the actual physical package is being streamed across the network. So it's coming from my primary site distribution point. So if I scroll across here, we'll see here it's from my virtual DP directory. So this is my web page. Okay, and here's the content format. So if I go back, content BC31, I should see that. I'll go back. Let me go back for a minute and see that. Just tie it together. So if I look at my deployment type down here, okay, content BC31, so I know it is that content, right? So and then on we go to the end, and that's it, right? So I'm currently streaming across. So let's go and exit this, and we should see the little bar pop up down here as we're unloading. Here, let me scroll down. Hopefully I didn't miss it. There it was, unloading. Looks like, yeah, shutdown. So shutdown's in progress. Okay, and if I refresh this at this stage, then now we're idle, right? So that's the client. The way that this works on the client side is we enable content acquisition, content download, content availability, everything that ConfigMgr clients do for normal deployments, we do for virtualized apps. But then we know how to talk with the App-V client and tell the App-V client, instead of going to your standalone infrastructure style servers, instead we have the content that you want. So the App-V client is definitely enabling running the virtualized app, but it's leveraging the resources and the goodness that is the ConfigMgr client to help find that content, to help run out of the client cache. So in this case, I'm streaming across the network from a DP. If I chose, I could run it locally, and at that stage, it would download to the client cache, the ConfigMgr client cache, and this path that I just showed you here, this path would actually reflect the local client cache folder, and so on. So, and there's certainly a lot more things that we could talk about with App-V, and I could show you with App-V. That really suffices for now in the overview type of format I wanted to do. So I'll go ahead and wrap the discussion at this stage, and hopefully this has piqued the interest on App-V. App-V with ConfigMgr 2012 is a really cool combination. So feel free, take a look, and hopefully you will find it as cool as I do.